Hello, lovely people. It's nice to see you again. I am coming to you and I decided to do my review, I suppose, of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. This is part of the classics that I decided to read. Started the project this summer and I decided to make it kind of go all year long. So I have a list of books that I want to read, and Great Expectations was on that. Next month I will be reading another classic now that I'm done with this one. So let's talk about Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. I'm going to go over a summary, then I'm going to go over the characters, what my favorite part of the book was, and then kind of what I did not like about the book. So that's out of the way. I guess we'll go ahead and just get started. So Charles Dickens wrote Great Expectations later in his life. From this copy, which is the Penguin Classics edition, it says here that he wrote Great Expectations as part of a series of periodicals, and that was called All Year Round. In All Year Round, he published Hard Times, which was in 1854, A Tale of Two Cities, which was 1859, and then Great Expectations, which was from 1860 to 1861. Dickens' health was failing during the 1860s, and this was kind of nearing the end of his life. He did end up publishing a few more novels before his death. There was Our Mutual Friend and The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which he did not complete. So this was one of his third to last novel, probably second to last novel that was completed. This is considered to be one of Charles Dickens' greatest novels, greatest complete novels. I would say yes, it is a great novel. It is something that should be read, but we'll get more into that in a second. So, a summary of Great Expectations. I'm not going to go through the whole plot. You can read the whole plot synopsis in various different places. Wikipedia has it. Goodreads has a pretty good summary as well. But this is kind of my summary of the book. I'm not going to hit all the major plot points, so don't get angry with me if I don't hit the plot points that you really enjoyed. So, Great Expectations is a coming-of-age story. It's set in Kent, England, and this is during the early to mid-19th century. Reader follows Pip. He's a 7-year-old boy who's being raised by his elder sister, and that's after the death of his parents. The novel begins with Pip encountering a convict who has been escaped from a prison ship. Pip helps out the convict by giving him some food from family's larder, and when he does that, he just kind of starts freaking out because he thinks that his sister, who has been raising him, is going to find out about it and is going to punish him. So Pip is an inquisitive child, but he's always discouraged for his questions and from asking too many questions by his older sister, who has raised him by hand, which basically means she just beats the crap out of him all the time and doesn't really put up with a lot of childish nonsense, I suppose. Poor Pip seems to live in constant anxiety and fear caused by his sister. Pip's brother-in-law is named Joe, and Joe is a blacksmith. And Joe is not educated, but he seems to be making a pretty decent living, being able to take care of his wife and Pip and himself and feed everybody, and without an education. So he's a very humble blacksmith, and he's also like a really, really good guy. I am a huge fan of Joe. I think he's the best character in the entire book. Pip eventually goes to an evening primary school and learns how to read and write. And then he gets invited to the home of a wealthy spinster, and she's an elderly spinster by this time, and her name is Mrs. Havisham. Miss Havisham likes to have younger people around to kind of entertain her and play and keep her occupied, I suppose. Pip's time with Mrs. Havisham, he learns over time that he's actually quite poor and that he's kind of ashamed of where he's come from, and he's ashamed of Joe for being the humble blacksmith. But he discovers that there's a much richer world out there, a world of wealth, and that being a gentleman is highly respected by these people who are wealthy. And so he desires to become a gentleman. Pip, after longing to become a gentleman, he ends up becoming Joe's apprentice for a little while to become a blacksmith. But then this opportunity drops into his lap, and he comes into an inheritance which they call his great expectations. And this allows him to start pursuing the dream of becoming a gentleman. So the story continues on as Pip grows up, and he grows into this gentleman. He eventually learns where his inheritance comes from. He learns the backstory of many of the other characters in the novel, and nearly gets killed twice. He ends up having a bout of depression near the end of the book, and then in the very end, he figures out what life's truly about, and the actual morality of the story is given to the reader at that point. Let's talk about the characters next. Pip, the main character, I found him kind of to be an annoying character. As a child, he's very anxious. He's, very, able to perceive a lot. He's more perceptive, I guess, than a child really should be at 7 years old. That was my only issue with Pip at the beginning. And then he is sort of just ashamed of his background. He's ashamed of everything. And Joe, and it's just the kindest person to Pip is Joe. And the fact that he's ashamed of Joe's background, that annoys me, and I don't like it when characters are ashamed of where they came from. It just never jives right with me. I liked Pip's drive, but I did not like Pip's laziness. That's just something I can't stand in characters. Also is when they don't do anything and then they complain about their situation because they haven't done anything. So I had that problem with Frankenstein as well. I don't know if that was just kind of something that was in the English way of living at that point, if lots of people were just kind of lazy and complained about their lives, or if it was just something that, these authors just really wanted to hammer home and really point out. It's like, you can't do this and, complain. You can't be lazy and complain. You have to do something, and then maybe you'll have something to complain about. But I don't know, that's just something that I also don't like about characters like that complain a lot and didn't do anything and still have something to complain about. There was the convict, who we later find out is named Abel Magwitch, and we also find out some other interesting stuff about Abel. I won't spoil that. I mean, I know Dickens is like 100 years old now plus, but if you want to go read the book and you'll find out, what happens. I don't necessarily like Abel Magwitch. I think his heart ends up in the right place. I think he does the right thing. However, he's still a convict. I don't like, I don't like characters that kill other characters. I have a problem with that, as morally speaking. So, bad guy with a good heart, maybe, I don't know. I mean, he was preferable than the other bad guy who tricked Miss Havisham, with Compeyson, who is the other convict who also escaped the prison ship after Magwitch at the beginning. And anyway, Magwitch is at least a bit more preferable to the other convict in this. There are several characters in this book, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to go through the ones that kind of stuck out to me the most. Mrs. Joe, who is Pip's sister. Mrs. Joe at the beginning of the book is sort of just mean. She's obviously very stressed. She's been trying to get along and live her life and, you know, be married to Joe, which being married to Joe is probably fine. But she has to take care of a child who's not hers, you know, by birth. She's his sister, and she's been raising him. So, I mean, that's probably got to be stressful. She seems like she's really just mean and nasty and stressed out, essentially. Eventually, an accident happens, and she becomes much nicer because she's basically disabled, and then she ends up dying prematurely. Joe, who is married to Mrs. Joe, Pip's sister, like I said earlier, nicest character in the entire book. Joe has a heart of gold. He is steadfast. He's loyal. He will help anybody with anything. He just puts up with a lot of abuse, too. And I think by the end of the book, Joe, you know, gets what he deserves at the end, which is, you know, a comfortable life, which is what, honestly, anyone deserves. Miss Havisham. Havisham is a spinster who basically was jilted at the altar. And because she was jilted at the altar, this traumatized her so much to the point where she is always wearing the wedding gown that she was supposed to be married in. And she still has all the food that was supposed to be for her wedding feast, I guess, or dinner. The food still remains on the table rotting, and her wedding dress is basically just kind of dingy and old and falling apart, and she doesn't care. She does not care. She lives her life in her house. She does not ever leave her house, and she invites children to her home in order to entertain her. She is raising a child named Estella. Estella, she becomes Pip's desire. One of the things that Pip desires very much is to eventually marry Estella. Estella, though, is a very cold, very haughty girl. She's kind of snooty. She's not very nice to Pip at all from the beginning. And I'm just kind of like the whole time going, Pip, why in the world are you interested in such a snotty girl? You shouldn't have anything to do with her. But I don't know, I guess that's just his attraction to her. She's beautiful. So that's mostly what it is. The attraction is that she's just beautiful. And maybe it's just because she's very intelligent, and Pip knows she's very intelligent. But of course the whole time I'm going, don't go for it. Don't go for it, Pip. She's so mean. Biddy. Biddy is another girl that's in Pip's life. He appreciates Biddy. Biddy is a very sweet, loving girl. Biddy comes in to help Joe when Mrs. Joe has her accident and becomes too mentally handicapped to really do much of anything. Biddy helps Joe take care of her until her death, and then Biddy then takes care of Joe after that and helps him with his home and housework and all of that sort of stuff. She also ends up teaching Joe how to read eventually, so that's wonderful. And Pip has an attraction to Biddy, but not as much as his attraction to Estella. So he continually seeks out Estella as the novel goes on, and he's continually interested in marrying Estella, which Estella until the end of the book is not interested in Pip. Then there's Mr. Jaggers, who is the attorney that helps Pip with his great expectations and gets him set up in London. Mr. Jaggers' assistant is a very interesting character, actually, Mr. Wemmick. And he's Mr. Jaggers' clerk, not an assistant, but sort of like an assistant. So he's kind of like the go-between for Jaggers and Pip. I just think Mr. Wemmick is just such a nice guy. He has a father who is elderly, and he takes care of his father, and he has basically a comfortable home for his father to live in and to take care of the aged until, you know, his untimely death will occur. And that's Mr. Wemmick's purpose in his life, to, you know, serve his father. But of course, when he goes to work, Mr. Wemmick is a completely different character. He's, you know, a jerky lawyer's assistant at that point. But when he goes home, he's a sweet man who's taking care of his father. And I like the relationship that Pip and Mr. Wemmick end up having in the book. So it's really nice. I mean, there are just so many characters you could talk about in this book. Some of them with very small parts, some of them with really big parts. There is one more character I will mention. His name is Herbert, and he becomes Pip's friend. When Pip moves to London, they live together. They kind of learn to become gentlemen together. They get in a bunch of debt together, and then they try and figure their way out of it. And then he also goes to Herbert to help him with some other problems when the convict Abel Magwitch comes to meet Pip again later on in the book. Then again, Pip has to help Abel. It's kind of interesting how all of that works out and the ending of the book. My favorite part of the book. I really liked Joe. I thought Joe was the absolute best part of this book. I think that more of the characters I wish were a lot like Joe. I mean, there were a few in there. I think Mr. Wemmick and Joe had very similar traits and had very similar outlooks on life, which is probably why I liked both of those characters so much. They were just very positive. They were always kind to Pip, and I feel like everybody should strive to be as good-hearted and supportive as Joe was. So he was my favorite. Event-wise that happened in the book, I don't really have a favorite event that happened in the book. I guess that maybe not necessarily being my favorite, but when you find out who the benefactor for Pip is, it was surprising. I didn't see it coming necessarily. And when it was explained, I was almost slightly disappointed. I really wanted another character to be the benefactor. Not necessarily. Okay, I really wanted Joe to be the benefactor. So it wasn't Joe. I will give you that much. It was not Joe. You would think that it would be Joe, but it wasn't. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not going to say who the benefactor actually was. We know who, if you read the book, you know who Pip thinks it is. Pip thinks it's Miss Havisham because she's, been supporting him in other ways. So she thinks that, oh yeah, she's supporting me and that she's got to be my benefactor. Well, no, that's not the case either. So that's two characters that it's not. But you can find out the rest. What did I not like about this book? Mostly I didn't like the language. I felt like because the text, some of it was written in the local accent of Kent, I couldn't read it easily, and I don't like it when I can't read something very easily. So in this book, Dickens' language felt old to me, but not old English, old just, an older way. Definitely an older way of writing compared to contemporary novels. So I struggled a bit with the text, and what I ended up doing was listening to an audiobook and reading the text at the same time. So that helped me really kind of get through the difficult portions of that. And then when I had moments where I just listened to it and then went back and read it, so it made it much easier for me to actually read the book. The book was boring to me. The story wasn't fast moving as I felt it should have been moving. It just felt very slow the whole time I was reading it. And I honestly did not like most of the characters. I think Dickens meant for the reader to not really like a lot of the characters, but I'm not really sure. Like I said, I really only liked two of the characters, and those were the characters that had the kindest hearts, so that's how that is. This book wasn't on a grand scale, and it wasn't like a grand look into a historical period like some other classic works do. For example, Anna Karenina was way more epic, I feel, and that was through, the novel moving the characters throughout different, cities and rural towns in Russia itself. Anna Karenina would travel to St. Petersburg, or she would travel to Moscow, or they talk about the train travel. Or if the characters were arguing, they were doing it in an intimate place, like in their homes in the rural towns. But if they were interacting with each other and other characters around, they were always in like a ballroom scene or in an open place in St. Petersburg or the train station, or, there were a lot more grand scenes, whereas Great Expectations wasn't that. It was only set in Kent, in this small town where Pip grew up, and then in London. And in London, there isn't a lot of exploration of London itself, which was very disappointing to me. I don't even remember, I don't think I even highlighted, or tabbed a specific passage where he was describing London or anything like that, or even the rural town. So kind of dissatisfying to me. So honestly, I was sort of dissatisfied with what Dickens had to offer in this book. And what he had to offer, honestly, was just a morality tale. A morality tale that was, you should be happy with being a humble person and living a humble life. Joe the blacksmith was the exemplar of this. He lived a simple life. Yes, he didn't know anything. Yes, not know anything, but yes, he was illiterate. Yes, he wasn't educated, but he was able to take care of himself and his family, and he lived a good life, and he was able to be married again after his first wife passed away. And that simple life is what people should strive for. And I think, that's a wonderful morality tale and all. I have no problems with that. Dickens is almost a little, I don't know what the word I'm trying to find is, but discouraging perhaps in people wanting to advance themselves, I feel like, which is, today in contemporary times, it's like you're always being pushed to advance yourself further in this rat race. So maybe there is still something to learn here. Maybe there is, a benefit to reading something that tells you, hey, a humble life isn't so bad. And it's really not. So, I give him all the credit in the world for the morality tale. I think that's perfectly fine. The Mystery of Pip's Benefactor, The Tale of Miss Havisham, and the trick that was played on her, being jilted at the altar, her resulting manipulation of the lives of a few of the other characters, Pip's feelings around the events of the story, and the ending for Pip and Estella. I felt like that those were all very good, and I thought those were all very well handled. I just feel like this book could have been wrapped up in a whole package if the setting wasn't so, not bleak. It just, the scale wasn't grand enough. It was so tight. It was almost too tight of a story, and there needed to be more description of setting. There needed to be some beauty in it. I lacked in finding beauty in it, except for perhaps the last scene of the entire book. Yeah, some of it was just so, not rough and tumble, but just bleak. The poor were described as, poor, squalorous. I don't know if squalorous is a word, but it should be. And the comparison between the rich and the poor in this, and then Pip's wanting to become a gentleman and ending up becoming in debt because of this thing he wanted, which was never probably going to happen. Truly, just all of that was okay. And maybe that's the beauty of it, and maybe I'm just missing it. This book just didn't speak to my soul, really. I think that's probably the best way of describing it. It just didn't speak to my soul. I did not get, you know, as much out of it maybe as some other people would. I don't know, maybe I'm just not in the right headspace for Great Expectations. But regardless, it was still a decent book. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. I figure at some point in the future I may go back to it and read it over again, and perhaps I will get more out of it at that point. I don't know. So I guess I'll go ahead and talk about what I will be reading next. So far in the classics that I have read, I've read Kenneth Grahame's Wind in the Willows. That was really good. I enjoyed Wind in the Willows quite a lot. I may end up doing, well, I should probably do it. So I'll probably end up doing another video on Wind in the Willows for the classic series. And then I've read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and that I did another video on for the classic series. And so then this was Great Expectations. So the next book in the classic series that I will be reading is Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm so excited to read this. And I got the Penguin English Library edition. It's just, let's just bask in the glory of this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful cover. It's just so dang pretty. Back of it, or the spine of it, I mean. It is buttery, soft, and beautiful, and nice and floppy, and I like the size of the text too, now that I'm looking at it. This will be easy. This will be easy to read. I have a feeling. I know my husband's read it and he enjoyed it a lot, so I'm really hoping I'll read it. So this is going to be October, and I figure Bram Stoker's Dracula, vampires, and all of that is very fitting for a Halloween / spooky read. I'm not gonna do all spooky, but at least this one spooky book I will definitely read for October. So anyway, I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I tried my best on that one. Charles Dickens just did not thrill me. Perhaps another one of his books will do better. I was looking at going back to A Tale of Two Cities and rereading that. I read that in, I want to say, my freshman year of high school. And I remember it being really interesting to me, certain parts of it anyway. So I think I'd be interested in going back and rereading that. But thank you so much again for joining me, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.